Yeah. Well, I think so the things that you want to do this and then like will be and that's what I want. Back in the summertime.
Jake, there should be a link now.
Yeah. I can. Actually, if you go to CWS on YouTube, yeah. Yeah. I need to get this bottom. Yeah. What do you guys think? I don't think much. Maybe a few. I haven't looked too much. Oh, really? Yeah.
Not bad. That was the, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Can you use me?
Yeah.
It is focused, huh?
Screen share. Yeah, the only thing that is.
I'm going to move this a little bit closer and I can put the mic in this.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had this. Zoom in.
And save the call.
This way. Stay through. Yeah. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming again. Another great audience. And even though the weather looks nice for now, I think Dave's going to be telling us shortly that it's going to be going downhill a little bit this afternoon evening. But we need the rainfall, so we'll be thankful for that. Dave Dombek is here. Many of you may know him. He comes in every semester to give at least one briefing, but he's also a friend to our media career days, which are now in the fall. If you're an undergraduate student and you're interested in forecasting, Dave is the hiring coordinator for forecasting at AccuWeather, so might be a good person to talk to after the briefing or during career days if you're interested. Dave, I want to thank you for coming in. It's all yours.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for everyone here at Penn State for the opportunity to do the weather briefing again. It's always fun coming over here to my alma mater. I try to get here once a semester, and so this is my slot here today. So a great opportunity, and I apologize for not being able to come to the picnic that you guys had a couple weeks ago, a week and a half or so ago. Everything was on target. I was planning on the 6th or 7th, whenever you guys had the first date you had, and then looking at when things got rescheduled, my nephew, 11-year-old nephew, it was his birthday party, so that was important. So I was at his birthday party celebrating his big 1-1 that day. So, but I do obviously, like Dan was saying, I'll be at the career days coming up here next month, and hopefully I'll try to make a brief appearance at the tailgate you guys are having. I guess it's at the Maryland game. So won't be able to stay there long with other commitments that day, but I'm going to pop in just to say hi. We got one part, try to get there. So anyway, again, thanks for the opportunity. What we're going to do, as I sometimes do, rather than just focusing on the weather today and the upcoming days, which I will get to, oftentimes I'll have a little sidebar study or a little mini a seminar on a certain topic. I've done backdoor cold fronts in the past, talking about forecasting tips. And actually, I'm going to talk today, about 10 or 15 minutes of today's briefing. I'm going to spend some time on something that's near and dear to my heart that I do every day when I'm working a forecasting shift at AccuWeather, and that's dealing with New York City. I forecast for New York City. I've been forecasting for many, many years, and there are some things that I've picked up over the years. Who here is from New York City area, metro area? Got a couple of hands there. Okay, so some of this will be coming in. Some of this you're gonna know when I go through some of this information here. So as we go through here, just some climatology first of all for the Big Apple. At the bottom of the temperature curve, 3827 for Central Park. And again, this is focusing on Central Park, not LaGuardia, JFK, but for Central Park itself. So at the bottom of the temperature curve, normal high, normal low, 3827. Top of the temperature curve in July, 84 and 69. Today, normals are 67 and 53. The all-time coldest there registered below on February 9th, back in 1934. And the all-time hottest was 106, July 9th, 1936. That decade of the 30s was a pretty amazing decade of weather. Average annual precip in Central Park, 4994. When you figure that's almost 50 inches. And over the years, I've noticed, time and time again, I see sometimes Central Park will come in with like bullseye, and it's not just a fluke. I've seen it more from time to time. Every season, you'll see like 1 or 2 events where they overachieve and do better than everybody around. And it's not a coincidence. And I looked up the proofs in the pudding, as they say, in the data. And these are the normal range precip total for 3 other sites around New York City. LaGuardia, 4625, JFK a little bit lower, Newark. So you can see the park kind of stands out as being the wettest of all those 4 sites around there. So it's not a coincidence. It actually does happen more often than not. Just the shape of the coast and extra convergence that goes on there, a lot of times they do overachieve. The wettest year on record for the park, 83, over 80 inches. Driest year, 2609, back in 1965. There were some very dry years back in the early mid-60s. Snowfall right around 25 inches, a little over. That's their average. The snowiest was the 95-96 winter. The big blizzard of 96, of course, had a lot of that in their other pretty substantial storms during that winter, 75.6 inches, and then the least snowy winter on record was a strong El Nino winter, 72, 73, 2.8 inches. I believe that was the same winter that Philadelphia had the trace. They had 6 occurrences of a trace added up to a trace for the entire winter. The average number of days that get to 90 or better in the park, about 18. And the first 32 of the fall, that's still about a month away. They have the average date, the long-term average date is during that second week of November. When you're forecasting for New York City Central Park, some tips, temperature tips here. Obviously, a big city, yes, they got Central Park, they've got grass, they've got trees and bushes, but it's right within a huge city. And they just don't radiate well. That is not a place that radiates very well. They get their coldest, and you'll see this time and time again in the winter months, they'll actually get their coldest readings oftentimes by advection, by driving the cold air in there by the wind. And the best wind to get to the coldest is actually a straight north wind comes right down the Hudson Valley, no downsloping whatsoever. If you have a cold shot that lasts maybe 2 days, or a couple, 2 or 3 days, oftentimes it's the first night that's the coldest in the park, or maybe it's an equal. The first night and the second night are about the same. Whereas, at that first night, the wind is blowing, and there's not a large elevation difference close into the city, so the temperatures are fairly uniform. They'll vary 4 or 5 degrees within that region. But it's on the second night, winds die down, high builds in, you got a good radiation and cooling setup, and that's the night where you can see like a 15 or 20 degree range of temperatures from the suburbs to the city. But again, oftentimes it's that first night that's the coldest, or maybe they're about equal. If you're dealing with a light variable wind situation, in the daytime, I've noticed the park responds very well. Their temperatures will go up really nicely, and sometimes they actually are running ahead of the curve compared to some of the other sites around. They will do very well as long as that wind is light variable before sea breeze kicks in, dealing with spring and summer months. An east wind, they could also do pretty well, because if you look at the map there, the east wind, a lot of that trajectory is coming over Long Island. It's not coming over the water. I mean, yes, it's way out there, but it has a lot of trajectory over the land as opposed to over the water. Once it goes into the south, east or the south, totally different story. You get that water influence. And then, again, in the warmer season, you are keeping the temperature suppressed. And oftentimes you'll see light and variable, up, sea breeze kicks in, and then you'll drop 3 degrees or 5 degrees, and that's all she wrote for the high temperature that day. It is, with the proximity of water there, it's tough to get it 2 or past 90 in certain situations with backdoor fronts and sea breezes. And many years, it's very tough to get it to 0 or below 0. It's just a place where 90, yeah, they do get some 90s. Below 0 is even tougher. You go many years, and actually it gets tough to even get it into the mid or low single numbers there sometimes. Something to watch, and I've seen this happen before as well, behind cold fronts, especially if you've got a situation where maybe your temperatures have been suppressed some by an ocean flow, by a south wind or southeast wind. A cold front goes through, and immediately behind it, the wind goes westerly or northwest, it's a downsloping flow, the sun comes out, and before the cold advection really kicks in, and the 850s start dropping and everything, the thicknesses come down, you'll get that little bit of a gap in there where temperatures could sometimes you'll get firm and they'll overachieve. They'll end up higher than you expect just because of that effect of downsloping right behind the cold front before the cold advection really kicks in. Now, unless I've watched this over and over again, I've seen this happen so many times, that unless you really have a very, very strong low pressure system, particularly if it's a negatively tilted upper level trough, it's a lot of times it's very tough to get for the park to get into the warm sector. If it's just a neutral tilt, or certainly a positive tilt, that's a no-brainer. You get a neutrally tilted upper level trough, or short wave, and then the surface low, you're tracking it up the coast. Here comes the warm air. It's coming up into Salisbury. It's coming up into Dover, Wildwood, New Jersey, Cape May. It gets up to Atlantic City. It'll get up to Belmar, New Jersey. And all of a of a sudden it just gets cut off in the pass. It just never quite gets into the park. Triple point low might form right about there along the Jersey Shore. Exits south of the city, the wind stays east-northeast, northeast the whole time, and they never truly get into the warm sector. And then that low, the triple point low, ends up over at Iceland or West Hampton over on Long Island, and it exits out from there. So watch that. Unless you have a real strong system, a lot of times it's very tough in the wintertime, especially in the middle, the cooler winter, and later in the winter with the colder water temps. It's very tough to get that into the warm sector. As far as like using loss guidance, I've found over time, many days, a blend of NYC, Newark, and LaGuardia. Many days will actually beat just pure moss for New York City. And every situation is different. You have to weigh it all out. But I do like using Newark and LaGuardia in the mix as well in certain situations. Some days just NYC is going to be fine. Other days that way. JFK is kind of all by himself because of right of the water. And so that really, in most cases, is not going to come into the equation. And like we was talking about before, the dues, north wind situations, anywhere from like 350, 360, 010, right down the Hudson Valley. If you're looking at a bunch of numbers, one is 6, one's 8, one's 9, one's 5, one's 4, one's, I would just go with the lowest in a strong cold convection case all night, not just for 3 hours, but like all night long, straight north wind blowing a good strong wind. I'd go with the lowest of the bunch. You're probably going to be right. I've seen cases where the lowest of the bunch isn't cold enough. In some of those cases where we have a direct shot that comes right down out of eastern Canada, down through Quebec, down through New York State, right there. It doesn't have very far to go. It's what I call the express route. It doesn't have to come the scenic tour over the mountains and from the lakes in that direction. Some precipitation tips to think about. Again, we saw it, proof is in the pudding with the normals. They actually do get more precip on average over the long run than JFK, than Newark, than LaGuardia. And so always watch for the park, for the city to at least the possibility for them to overachieve in some of these precip events, whether it's snow or rain or some combination thereof. And they do pretty well at times with squall lines coming in from the west or northwest, thunderstorms that maybe come out of the Poconos or the Catskills, they come through New Jersey, they come through southeast New York. As you get farther east, especially if it's earlier in the season, get east of JFK, get out into Long Island, get into coastal Connecticut, then you start getting more of that influence from the water, the marine influence that tends to weaken the thunderstorms. But the park, where it's situated, stuff's coming in from the west and northwest, you don't really see that effect yet. So I've seen times when the park can do actually very well with squall lines and thunderstorms coming in from that direction. Of course, in winter storms, it's very easy to get rain or a changeover of rain early in the season. Water temperatures are still up, and then later, as you get into late January, February, even in March, it's a lot tougher to get those changeover situations because of the chillier water temps. And I've also seen over and over again, I've seen this situation where the park and Newark, they kind of, both of them are very similar in that regard, that they will hold on to snow in changeover situations. They'll hold on to snow or like kind of a snow-sleet mixture longer than JFK and even LaGuardia. I've seen, changes it. JFK, it's easy. It changes over the right of the water, and then it'll go change over to LaGuardia, and you're kind of waiting. You're waiting for it to change over to the park, and it goes an extra hour or two, and sometimes that does influence snow totals. Some other miscellaneous things. I've seen cases too with strong low pressure systems and a very strong area of cyclonic curvature on the backside of departing lows. Watch out for those situations, especially if the gradient is northeast or north. You're waiting for it to clear, and it just doesn't. With all that cyclonic curvature, it keeps the precip in longer, or it enhances it some, and then it's just tough to get rid of the clouds. So you'll see some of those situations as we head through the fall and winter months. As for the tropics, look at the shape of the coast, look at where New York City is located. and look at the climatology on tropical cyclones in the Atlantic Basin. And they, other than a Sandy was an extremely rare event where it made that sharp left hook like that. Most storms just don't do that. And so the chances of getting a catastrophic, end of the world type storm in New York City with damage, including a big storm surge, it's very rare. Obviously, it does happen. We saw Sandy; that was reality a couple of years ago. But New York City itself, typically, yes, they get rain, they get wind, but just the way they are, where they're situated, they usually, in tropical storms, hurricanes, are actually in a good place, and that they climatologically will not get the worst of these tropical systems. Wind speeds, if you look on any given day, especially up west or northwest wind, you look, Newark 20 gusting to 28, LaGuardia, 25 gusting to 32. Everybody around us, and then you look at the park, 12 knots. I mean, it's just the way it's protected. However, I have seen in some situations when the wind blows out of the northeast, they actually do pretty well with the wind speeds. But typically, you're going to see the odds in Central Park towards compared to other sites around. Generally, the wind speeds are lower. But if you've ever been in New York City, the big tall buildings, what do you get between the buildings? You get that, that funneling effect, the wind tunnel effect in between the buildings, and it really, it's very, very noticeable on a day where maybe the average winds are 8 or 10 knots. You get in between the buildings, right time of the day, and you can blow at like 25 knots through that gap in between the buildings. So, to sum up, New York City, it's very fun, but very tough and challenging place to work. I'm sure at some point you're going to have an opportunity there, but I've been dealing with New York City weather for many, many years, and it is, again, it's a very challenging thing. I'm looking at Paul here. Probably you remember the days back when you were working at AccuWeather, we used to do the flood check. Remember that? Called the flood check, Brooklyn Union Gas, and it was the changed names or whatever. But I mean, to some degree or another, we don't call it that anymore, but we still have our daily New York City temperature check every day. So, I've been involved for over 30 years in some kind of a New York City temperature check.
It was called the dump in those days too, because we did the sanitation department.
That's right, the dump. There you go. That's going way back. Going way back. Before we go on to talking about the current weather situation, anybody have any questions? Again, this is interactive. I mean, I'm the main person doing the talking here, but if anybody has any questions or comments or whatever about New York City weather, something from your experience, certainly feel free to chime in. And if not now, then maybe at the end when we wrap things up. Okay, now we're going to get into some of the current situation going on. I kind of just, kind of focusing here on Pennsylvania. Just sort of a summary of what's happening now. Temperatures right now are, earlier in the week, a little bit above normal. It's actually going to get somewhat cooler then for the rest of the week. Tomorrow on through the end of the week and into the upcoming weekend, not excessively below, not terribly cold, but definitely you're going to see temperatures on the other side of the curve here as we go through this week. We've got a pretty vigorous system coming through the area tonight. Fast mover. We're going to look at some of the specifics here. Probably some showers with that. I would think there's a good chance, whether actually thunderstorms or not, that's debatable. I could certainly see a rumble of thunder, a flash of lightning, maybe some hail. It's pretty chilly aloft. That's something we'll talk about in a little bit. And then the next couple of days look dry. If you look at the surface map, basically we've got a high building into the Ohio Valley tomorrow. That high ends up over maybe Virginia or so on Thursday, and then by Thursday evening, Thursday night, that high is pushing off offshore off the Mid-Atlantic coast. And then the challenge at the end of the week, and maybe the start of the weekend, is figuring out what kind of interaction there's going to be between a southern branch system that's going to be fairly moist, and at least in a diffuse fashion, there's going to be some moisture from Simon, a tropical system that's coming in from the eastern Pacific. That's going to get its moisture will get sprayed out and really kind of diffuse over time as we get later in the week. But some of Simon's moisture will eventually get pulled into the southwestern part of the United States, and then eventually in that fast flow, get involved with a system that will from a boundary and a wave, or maybe a couple of waves on that boundary, right in the southern branch. And then in the northern branch, you're going to have a short wave dropping in, pretty moisture storm. There's not much to work with there. There is a northern branch short wave, a little bit of a front. So what kind of interaction there's going to be between the two branches? Is there somewhat of a handoff of the southern branch moisture into the northern branch? Does the northern branch feature just have to pull some of the moisture northward to a point, and then it gets suppressed? So that's some of the challenges as we go through the week here. A couple of quick maps here. This was this morning. This was actually 12Z this morning. And that's a very strong jet here. You look there, I mean, that's a 130 plus 4, 300 millibars. I mean, this is a very strong system diving southeastward. And again, with that speed, it's not going to take very long to get farther southeast, round bend, and do its thing. So you're dealing with a pretty strong system there. That's this morning's 500 millibar, and it's the system up here, that max that you're going to see. It's racing southeastward. It's going to go from a positive to a neutral, and eventually around to a negative tilt tonight. And that's one of the things. Anytime forecasting, over and over and over again over the years, anytime I see a negatively tilted trough or a trough that's transitioning from neutral to negative, my red flags are always going up, and I'm always looking for something weird to happen, because you just look at the shape, that negative tilt, you've got excellent upper level diformance and everything that's happening there dynamically. So that's always something you want to watch for when you have those negatively tilted systems. The models, sometimes they tend to miss things, and whatever is happening, whether it's wind, whether it's precip, it'll overachieve somewhere, somehow. This was, again, I was trying to format things on the PowerPoint. I'm definitely not a PowerPoint whiz here. I was doing the best trying to squeeze things in. This was this morning's 850. But what I wanted to point out is, yeah, it's going to be a strong system, and it's chilly. There's no doubt. There's some chilly air, but it's not like horrendously cold up here. And what you're going to see happen is the chilly air that's up here, up in southern Canada, will be a glancing blow. A lot of it will come across the northern lakes, through the eastern Great Lakes, through New York State, northern New England, and then up that way. So the core of the chilliest air with the system is going to stay to the north. Yes, it will be a little bit below normal here later in the week, but it won't be anything out of the ordinary for early October. This was this morning's surface pressure analysis. What I wanted to point out was this right in here. That's with the system out here in the front, and there's just a little wrinkle. There's not much of anything at the surface yet. Again, that was, I think that pressure analysis was like might have been 13Z, 14Z this morning. But what will happen over time? Now, this might be slightly different. This was based off of the 6Z ones. It's kind of a combo NAN GFS combo map that I'll look at a lot. And it's very easy to get in touch with things at the surface and progression of things. But as you see, this is this evening, and that's down to actually have a little closed southern place. Actually, we'll probably be popping some kind of a low by this evening near Lake Erie, maybe near Cleveland, somewhere there. It's just a little wrinkle, but you're actually finally getting somewhat of a low pressure system to show up. Now watch by tomorrow morning. Look at what happens in 12 hours. Look at the deepening from, what was that, 1008, it was over 1,000 millibars. Now look at what this deepens to by tomorrow morning at 12Z. You go one step further, look where that is tomorrow evening, 988. So, what's happening down at the surface, it's a reflection of what's happening in the upper levels. And we know that there's a strong jet aimed southeastward. There's a strong short wave, a 500 millibar short wave that's going to go negatively tilted. And so all that's happening there is that the surface is just responding to what's happening up above. Now, with that said, looked at SPC, the outlook for today. Yesterday, if you recall, if you looked at it would have been, today's the day one we're looking at here. Yesterday would have been day two for today from SPC. They just had a general area, but they didn't have any slight risk. And then today they have seed text. They didn't really go beyond that. And today they actually do have two areas. And I think generally this is probably not a bad solution. They're probably updated now. 1630Z is usually when they do their update. See if that's changed at all. But I kind of like the general outlook here, in that you've got a strong low-level jet that's aimed northeast up through the Ohio Valley, kind of aimed right towards southwestern PA. Some of the severe weather parameters, the lifted index, the Cape, and so forth, are definitely showing this area in general as being the most unstable. And you've got some sun out, you've got some some heating going on ahead of that. So I kind of like that area in general. And then what happens is overnight, then everything sort of shifts over farther east, right along the eastern seaboard, maybe even into southern New England. It's a small area, but the indices are most impressive, like at 6Z and 9Z early tomorrow morning over here. And it does shift over into those areas. I don't think you're looking at it, again, this is October. This is not June or July, it's October. So you have to put things in perspective. But certainly, I think covering for some wind gusts anywhere, even here. If you look at the wind profile, we've got winds not too far off the deck for a time tonight that are going to be blowing at 45 knots. So if you've got even a line of showers, doesn't even have to be thunderstorms. If you pull any of that air down overnight tonight, that's certainly the potential. Somebody can get a good 30, 40 mile per hour or greater wind gust briefly as this comes through. And also with all the upward motion, although it's a short period, with that upward motion going on and squeezing, I would expect that at some point there's going to be a downpour. It might be just one line, it rains hard for a time and it does its thing, or there might be multiple lines. I'm not sure how that's all going to transpire here, but it does seem to be focusing for us on tonight. Maybe over a 6-hour period, it seems like between 0Z and 6Z is when a lot of the action is going to be happening, be shifting farther east during the overnight hours. But it could be one of those things where, it's not that big of a deal, but you're inside and all of a sudden you hear your neighbor's garbage can blow up or something, as this thing comes through. Or you hear the roof rain, as we call it. You hear the downpour as that's coming through. So now that is the see here. I want to get to the Firefox.
Just click in the black.
It is black, okay. Now we're going to get down.
So, Dave, you just mentioned some instability issues. The latest visible picture shows a little bit of debris coming in from the southwest, especially for south central PA. I don't know if you've taken a look at that, and if that would influence your forecast concept at all.
Yeah, and in fact, that's a very good point, because let's face it, this time of year your heating is limited. The days are getting shorter, the sun angles lower, but you can get those little opportune windows. And actually, let's get a Pennsylvania close-up here. We get a visible loop here. Visible animation. And there you go. That's what Dan was talking about here. This area is open right now, and your temperatures are coming up. So I think, Pittsburgh, and who knows whether it's here. I think it's south and west here. I think that's the best shot. I kind of, like down into West Virginia, we do have that little open area. There's this lead system that's kind of this little sneaky thing that went by and didn't do much, but that's departing now. That's exiting the scene. And it's actually getting sunnier out as we speak. And of course, you've got the band of clouds out to the west of us. Now, you want to check the latest radar here. And then you guys have the radar up on the wall there. Let's get a regional northeast loop. And there you go. There's the latest action that's happening here. I would certainly think something's going on there. And that looks like an interesting. Yeah, that's. Notice how, and this is kind of interesting too. See how most of the movement here is east, and then look at this stronger cell. What's it doing? It's turning to the right of the flow here, so it's a stronger, definitely something funky going on there. It's a little exploration what's happening under that. It's pretty cold aloft in this area, and so I would expect. And yesterday we saw the other system in Michigan. There were reports of hail down into Tennessee and Kentucky. So I think anybody that gets a stronger cell to come through in the short term could certainly be dealing with some small hail anyway as this moves on through. Just to go through some sequences, some maps here, and some of the solutions we're looking at. Here's the NAM. Well, this is 12Z. Of course, when we get to the Euro, it'll be the 0Z run of Euro. And here's the seasoning. And again, you can see that just a little kink in the isobars there. And then as we go through, it actually forms a low. And then as we go through in time, we've actually got a deepening low because it heads farther up into Canada. It's a quick shot. It's a very fast mover. And you see the wind goes westerly, and it will dry out very nicely, very quickly behind that. GFS solution, again, very similar. You can see the high pressure, like we were talking about, it moves over into the mid-Atlantic states, eventually offshore. And then the challenge is later in the week trying to figure out that interaction, as we said, between the southern and the northern branch. And it does look like the GFS is trying to do a little bit of a handoff right there. And that would be what that 78 hours says 18Z on Friday. So it is trying to do a little bit of its handoff from the southern branch system to a northern branch one coming through. Here's the Euro, receiving. One morning, again, similar look, that deepening low as it heads up into eastern Canada. Here's the Euro solution. Now, the Euro is a little bit farther south. Here's the same time step where the GFS on Friday would say it's raining there at 18Z Friday. The Euro is keeping the stuff a little more suppressed and keeping it to the south here, a little flatter look to it. So we'll have to see how that all evolves. But that being said, on the Euro, you see what it does. It actually does. It's a later time step. It's more later Friday night, and early Saturday, and it does have a little bit more of a wavy look and a bulge northward along the eastern seaboard Friday night and early Saturday. And here's the GFS, but showing the short wave. Here it is, the analysis. There it is at 18Z. Here it is at 0Z. Look at that and see how over time it's changing its tilt here. It goes around to that negative tilt. Looks like the max itself. Looking at this now, and I worked yesterday, it seems like the track of the max is a little farther south than it was yesterday for those who were studying this. I think yesterday the models were showing more like northern PA into southern New York State. I think if this is right, this track is right, and that short wave is a little bit farther south.
But it was certainly favoring northwestern PA, northwest central Pennsylvania too. Southeast was not seeing much in terms of QPF.
Right, but even that, Dan, my thought was even like a Philadelphia or a Baltimore, over to New York City, New Jersey, in that area, south and east of the max track, you're still in the axis of that short wave that comes through. And while the QPF, and I agree, the QPF is probably going to be lower there instead of half to 3/4. It might be more like 1/4 to a half, or a couple tenths to a third in that range. I still think there's a brief period. It might be an hour, it might be 20 minutes, where it rains hard. Sure. The line goes through, and again, there might be some gusty winds.
Yeah, I mean, you have the dynamics for sure.
Right. So that's the upper limit. Here's the 700 millibar. And you can see how quickly that goes through and how quickly the dry air. I mean, look at that. By 12Z tomorrow morning, I mean, New York City is done. I know the NAM to that, like it had 100 printed out after 12Z tomorrow. It's a very fast drying process that comes in behind this. Here comes the moisture later in the week. Here's your 850s, and again, we had discussed that before as far as the 850s. And watch the core. Yeah, it does make some progress southeastward. Then what does it do? It just rounds the bend, comes across the very northern tier up through New York State, New England, and then it stays up there. So we never really get into the core of the chilliest air without a trough. And here's some of the other indices here. This would be, I believe this is one's the Cape and one's the index.
That's got to be your Cape.
Yeah, this is right. This is probably your Cape. And again, it looks kind of impressive looking. There's 18Z. Again, for October standards. Remember what time of the year we're in. This is not July. But it does have that area up through the Ohio Valley, the Tennessee and Ohio Valley, up towards southwest PA. And then, of course, that all changes in the night. And then notice over here, right along the eastern seaboard, you've got that zone. Oh, wait, let me just stop that. You get over into here, and you see how the indices do look fairly impressive, either just offshore or right along the coast late at night. So again, I think that idea of having this another area, small, slight risk area, is probably correct. Forward here with the LIs. Again, it's 0Z. That's a nice little core down there near the Ohio River. Obviously, we want some negative LIs. And then look at those negative LIs that show up along the coast later at night.
Do you think this is a case of elevated convection at all? Just because of how much cooling there is aloft, and if you look at your parcel temperature versus the environmental, that's why your LIs are popping.
Right, that's a good point. And actually, I think what we'll do, Dan, while we're at that, what we can do is we can check the show water. A lot of times, if it's elevated convection, show water can actually do a pretty good job of indicating that. So let's see, let's load this up. I think a little bit of time to load the show waters. But yeah, I think that's a good point. It may very well be elevated. Now, as we're waiting for that to load up, here's the low-level jet. This is like an average low-level jet here, but this is a product I really like using this. When you're forecasting on a day-to-day basis, look at your low-level jet. It's so important, not only with figuring out wind speeds, how much transfer you're going to get down from wind gusts during the day, whether there's going to be severe weather. A lot of times, just for precip events, just run-of-the-mill precip events. If you see some strong low-level jet combined with more convection, that might be pointing right in that area where the nice QPF is going to be. Here's this evening, and there's some pretty impressive winds. And again, just not too far off the deck, 50+ knot winds into southwestern Pennsylvania. And this is at 60. That little core is above 55 up in far northeast PA and into the Catskills. And then it shifts. There's 12 tomorrow morning. Way up in the Maine and then eastern Canada by 18Z tomorrow. And this is the sequence there on that. Remember, I showed that one snapshot earlier of 300 millibar jet. This is actually 250, but same idea, same story here. It is a classic. Here, look at that. Look at your jet streak. You just do the old crosshairs. In that, back in my day, instead of entrance and exit, there was left and right and front and rear. So the left front quadrant. This area, let me just stop this. That left front quadrant of the jet. We're looking at right in here. Look at it. That's the area we really want to focus on. Again, that's a very strong jet across. Now here's your Showalter, as Dan was pointing out. Showalter index is a good one to use for elevated convection. And it certainly is showing some negative values, 0 and negative values up and 3 of the Ohio Valley toward southwest PA. It does have a whole core of below 2, maybe below 1 at some point if you broke it down every 3 hours. So I think even here, certainly there could be a, some flashlight and rumble of thunder. But it is, that's a good point. It may very well be more elevated than the projection that we have. So, yeah, we get past this. As for, what we're looking at, actually got a snapshot here. This is the 0Z. This is off of the NAM. And if you look here, there's your wind profile over here. There's your sounding, of course, very moist. This is 24Z. And again, for October standards, an LI of minus 1.2 here. This is another thing I wanted to point out here. Wet bulb 0, 75 nits, pretty low. So we get something beefy to come through here. There's a chance you can get some hail out of that. Some of the gridded information, this is off the Euro, off of the 0Z run of the Euro. I'm a real fan of using gridded data. The nice thing, on the pro site, you can do this, of course, you turn it over to AccuWeather. We can break down, we can break the NAM down every 3, the Euro every 3, GFS every 6. But it's nice to kind of see that, the start and ending times, that trying to focus on the window when it's going to be the worst of the storm, worst of the event coming through. And off of the Euro, it's pretty clear, when is our best precip going to happen? It's right in here. They're spitting out 900s. But look at this, 5400s between 0Z and 6Z. That's when I think most of our action is going to happen. It's going to be between 8 p.m. tonight and 2 in the morning. And obviously farther east it will be later. And I was focusing on New York City earlier, and it was just before I came over here, I was on the phone with Lee Goldberg, the chief meteorologist over at WABC, and we were thinking, for the early commuters over there, 6, 7 a.m. There's probably still some showers there by 8. It's probably gone. We're just about ready to exit the city, and then moves quickly away to the northeast after that. So that's it. And then you look at the Euro. Again, it had more of a suppressed look later in the week. And so look at, where's your precip? It kind of just skirts us with a little bit of stuff. It looks like it's mostly Friday night in here, but it doesn't have much in the way of QPF. Now, as we talk about the different models, I know the GFS was the one that was forecasting the stuff that would come a little farther north. So GFS might take a little bit of time as we're waiting for that to load. Anybody have any questions or comments, Dan?
Yeah, I think it's the biggest question going into the extended forecast is the differences in the global models. The GFS keeps us very wet, even through the weekend and early next week, whereas the European suppresses that southern shortwave. And I guess the question you have to ask yourself is, do you believe the high pressure center that the European keeps everything south of us, or do you believe the more northern track of the GFS?
And I know there will be a lot of dry air associated with that, with that northern high. The dew points will be pretty low. I think the key there, it is a split flow situation. You do have a distinctive southern and northern branch, and so I would watch for the position of the confluence zone where that sets up. And watch for trends. The old B model BT, look for the trends in the model over time and where that confluence zone is setting up. And if you see it, trending farther north over time, then I think the GFS is kind of funny look here at the end of the week. But even that being said, Dan, here's the right off of the GFS, the 12Z run. And yes, it does look kind of wet here on Friday. It's a wet day. And not only is it wet, this is something, and one's going to go with the other. One is going to go with the other.
It's going to be raw.
It's going to be raw. Look at this. Look at 18Z on Friday. Take a look at this. That's the 2-meter temp, but still, it's suggesting that it's having a hard time getting to 50 here.
Right.
On Friday.
Then
raw day.
Look down towards the end of Monday into Tuesday. The interesting thing about the GFS is European warms us up very nicely with return flow.
Right.
The strengthening Bermuda high backing in. But then the GFS shows a similar pattern, but wet and kind of raw. Even though the 850s go up there,
Yep.
we don't tap into the warm.
No. Yeah, and again, that's a good point. We're getting into the time of year now where, yes, like tomorrow, 850 is going to work perfectly because it's a west wind and it's well mixed, a lot of wind going on. But there's a lot of days from this point forward, the rest of the fall and into the winter months, don't just focus on 850s. 850s are maybe totally irrelevant. That's what's going on up there. 5,000 feet is irrelevant. It's all the mixing, what mixing there is. It's going to be low down. That's a good point, Dan. It's a totally different look here. And I've actually got a somewhat of a vested interest in this because my wife and I and some other families were actually going to be doing some camping this weekend, late weekend, and so it's certainly moving up. I can deal with the chilly weather. I'd rather deal with chilly and dry than a little higher temperatures and really wet. But any other questions? Anybody have any thoughts, questions, comments? Well, that's the challenge. As Dan said, the next couple of days it's pretty straightforward. If you boil it down, it's dry right now. Things are going to get active for a short period of time. Pretty vigorous system tonight. Dries out nicely tomorrow. Stays quiet into Thursday, and then we have a challenging period in the late week and early weekend.
I think if you get through today and tomorrow, we get out of this fast flow coming in from the northwest, maybe the models will better resolve what's going on with the upcoming weekend and everything. Usually when there's multiple disturbances, you can't rely on timing.
Right.
You just can't.
Yeah, you can't. And that's a classic case. Look for consistency too. I mean, Euro, a couple of runs in a row now has been fairly consistent in keeping things suppressed. So if we see the one thing's going to happen, I think maybe the solution is somewhere in the middle of the GFS and the Euro. That certainly is a possibility. My gut feeling is that the Euro is going to have a better handle on this. Over time, in my experience, is split flow situations. The Euro does a better job than the GFS. But that's a general rule in this. We'll see what happens over the next couple of days. New York City stuff.
Questions for Dave? Anybody? Okay, thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming, everyone. Next week, another AccuWeather friend, Elliot Abrams, will be here.
Okay, Dave, good to see you.
Over here.